Thank you all for being here tonight. So I appreciate you checking in the chat with where you're listening to us from this evening. We are so glad that you could join us. My name is Lexi Alm, and I will be moderating your session tonight on LEEP, the Clark curriculum. And we will go ahead and get started here. I have three wonderful presenters joining me tonight, but before we introduce them, I'm going to do a quick overview of how the technology is going to be used tonight. At this stage, I think many of us have been on Zoom before, but we are going to be using two different pieces of the Zoom technology this evening. We will be using the Q&A feature to take questions at the end of the evening of the session tonight, and we will be using the chat section if you have any technological questions or issues while our panelists are speaking tonight. I will be making sure that you can hear us on the chat. So if you do have any questions or any technological issues, please use the chat. And any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A. We have a few prepared remarks for you so that you can meet our panelists and get to see how they work in our curriculum. And then we will take your questions following that. So without further ado, I will have our panelists introduce themselves. And I'm going to go back to the starting slide so that they can introduce themselves in the order that they appear on this first slide. And Nancy, we will go ahead and start with you.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I have as my backdrop the campus screen, and nothing gives me more pleasure when we often do these kind of open houses except to walk across the green, which is one of my favorite spots on campus, and enter the building there where the psych department is. I'm Nancy Budwig, longtime faculty member in the psychology department, where I'm a professor of psychology. And my research background is in the area of developmental psychology. And in particular, I look at student development, and particularly interested in transition points, the transition from high school to college, and also from college out into the world of work, graduate school, and civic life. And in terms of any kind of organizations that I'm involved with on campus, or areas that I've been involved with, one thing that I'm particularly passionate about is I am a mentor to one of the fellowship groups for summer fellowships for students who do special projects called the Steinbrecker Fellows. And I also have been centrally involved in the development and professional development of working on the LEEP curricular framework. That's a little bit of background about me. Thank you, Lexi.
Hi, thanks Lexi, and thanks Nancy. So my name is John Mcgee. I'm a professor in the computer science program in the math and computer science department. And I've been at Clark for about 9 years now. And actually, I've learned a lot from Nancy over the past few years about teaching some of the first year intensive courses and incorporating some of her expertise into what I do in my POP courses. So hopefully I'll be telling you about those things. In my research, I work with people with disabilities, creating computer systems that help them communicate and interact with other people. So these are people that have like severe communication disabilities, maybe quadriplegia, and we use computer vision technologies, for example, to enable them to control the mouse pointer by moving their head. And then we create software that they can then use with their head-controlled mouse pointer to, for example, send messages or browse the web. And we experiment with improving those things and seeing how they improve people's lives. So I really like computer science as a way to connect to people as like my main thing in research. And I have a lot of experience over the past few years involving undergraduate students in the research. So every year I have a group of students who work with me over the summer, and we develop something new and try something new. And we usually have a paper published out of it where the students come and present that work at a conference. And it's really exciting to involve students in it.
Hi everyone, my name is Arai. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a senior here at Clark. I'm from Arlington, Virginia, which is in the Washington, D.C. area, and I study psychology and a self-designed major called Studies of Oppression and Liberation, which is a bit of gender studies, race studies, genocide studies, and peace studies. Outside of class, there are a few things I do. I research in our psychology department on diverse families and sexualities with Dr. Abby Goldberg, which I'm sure I'll speak more about later. I'm also a Connections mentor. Connections is one of Clark's 2 pre-orientation programs for students of color. So when I was an incoming first year, I was a mentee. And this senior year, I got to serve as a mentor. So that's something that I really enjoy, kind of coming full circle in my Clark journey with that. I'm also a co-president of our beekeeping club on campus, which has been a whole lot of fun. Just last weekend, we actually extracted the honey from the hive, so we're really excited about that. And we're prepping the bees for another winter. And there are a couple of other things I do as well, like working for our Office of Admissions.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here this evening. To our wonderful panelists, they are going to be speaking to us tonight about, as you can see, LEEP, the Clark curriculum. Now, LEEP stands for Liberal Education and Effective Practice, which are it's our model of education here at Clark. And as Nancy alluded to, she has done a lot of work around this area, and our faculty and students also embody what it means to engage in liberal education and effective practice. So I'm actually going to hand over the presentation to Nancy to speak with us a little bit about what this means and how it manifests tangibly in the curriculum. And then we'll also hear from John and Arai as to how they have experienced these tenets of liberal education and effective practice in their work as well. So Nancy, go ahead.
Right, this won't be death by PowerPoint, I promise you. There are about 3 slides here, and I'm going to try and just crystallize what it is that we're trying to do here. So if you look at the first slide, you see this somewhat traditional notion about how learning takes place. At many institutions of learning, we almost have this folk belief that you're kind of, as a student, the faceless creature there, and the professors or the sage on the stage is going to pour all that knowledge into you. You're not really doing anything. It just kind of dribbles in. And that's not a very good model of education. It's certainly not a model that embraces liberal education, which is all about inquiry and civic engagement and the like. So at Clark, we were thinking about that, and we got to thinking about this as a faculty group many, many years ago. We've been at this for some time. And we decided that what Clark needed was a slightly more intentional and active learning model. And I'll just pull out 2 pieces of that that I think are really, really central, that we know from the studies that many people like myself in developmental psychology and in the learning sciences, education know about student learning. And that is, students learn best when they're passionate about their learning. So if you really want to get to learning something, there has to be a way to engage you. And the second thing about that is there's got to be some expertise. So if you see that little teeter-totter, there's this delicate balance that we're trying to find between making sure students are studying things that they're interested in and also getting the mentorship and the guidance that students need. And so we began to think about how to do that. And if we could just see the next slide, what I'd really like to focus on at Clark is there are many ways you can do practice. At many schools, it involves just having students out and about, doing internships, doing something called high impact practices, all of which you will find at Clark. But I would like to say one of the features of Clark that is near and dear to my heart and that I've learned greatly from my colleagues over the year is the intense mentorship and expertise of the faculty and the staff around campus. And while one picture makes it look like, some experienced person is pulling a student up the stairs, in fact, the way this model takes place is in a community at Clark. So I've often turned to John as a professor, or to some of my students, or Lexi has turned to me when she had a question for a student. We all work together to kind of make sure that all the newcomers into this community are taken care of, and the newcomers pay it back and add a richness by introducing us to new ideas. So I'd say this is one distinctive. It's not that you don't get mentorship at other places, but this collective and intense mentoring that you get, in addition to students following their passion, was just something I wanted to pull out for you, and something we may want to talk more about. A second thing, and if we go one more slide, that I really wanted to pull out is the kind of pathway approach. So again, I think it's now 15 years in that we've been working on this kind of model, and it's building off something that has been going on at Clark a long time. And a lot of other schools are doing it too. Engaged learning is where all the action is at, and there are a lot of buzzwords and people talking about that. But what I've really appreciated about Clark's efforts is to try and have something like a pathway and some common experiences along the way that will teach certain kind of skills and still leave students the opportunity and individual majors to provide students with specific learning that they need. And I'll just pull out a couple of common features that every Clark student has the opportunity to have. Those might be something in the pathway there, like the first year seminar, a problem of practice course, and a capstone experience. And I'll say a bit more. But also surrounding that pathway are lots of other experiences. And when you put that together, what you get is that different students, Arai or other students I've worked with, will pick different kinds of classes that they want to take, different kinds of co-curricular experiences, and then through the mentorship and guidance, we're going to bring that all together so that you can weave it into a capstone experience. So the first year intensive is a seminar that every first year student gets to pick, and you sign up for one, and you're in a community, a learning community with about 15 other students, and you get to know them and you learn together, and we can talk about some of our own experiences. You can ask us about that. In your sophomore or junior year, you have the opportunity to take problems of practice courses, which take place in every department, and they give you a taste of what it's like in a particular area. For example, in psychology, I do a problems of practice course on program evaluation. And this provides the opportunity for students to learn, how do programs get evaluated? If you're interested in entrepreneurship or education, how would you know if the program you're setting up is working? And we actually take on a real program evaluation at the national level. I've been working so far with national problems. I might try an international problem at some point. And we actually experience this, and the students are scaffolded. We help you, and you actually contribute back in, meeting with the agency and doing the work. And finally, then in your senior year, students do capstone level projects or research, and they pick a topic that helps them pull together all their learning. So in the first year seminar, you get tons of guidance. By the capstone experience, you're pretty much working as an independent scholar or activist on a project that you have taken a lot of responsibility to design. So in just summing up, the effective practice curriculum looks different for every single student because there's a lot of choice. It's embedded within a typical liberal arts-based education where you're going to take a certain set of general courses as well as a major. Some students double major or minor. But in addition, you have the opportunity not just to learn about from books and from faculty, but actually engage in the practices of the very things that you're studying. And that's the goal here, so that when you finish up at Clark, you're ready to successfully enter the world of work and civic engagement and be ready to engage and make major contributions to that work. So with that, I think I'll turn the microphone back, and I can maybe later on through Q&A talk a little bit about some of my own experiences with aspects of the curriculum if there's time.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. So now I'm going to turn it over to Professor John Mcgee to talk a little bit about his experiences working with undergraduates in his work and the types of classes that you've heard about here, the FYI, problems of practice, and capstone experiences that he may have had some experience with as well. So over to you, John.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lexi. So I've been privileged to actually teach all three of these kinds of classes. And I have currently a FYI seminar going on right now. That's my introductory computer science course. And so you could take this course either as an FYI, where I meet separately, and I have two groups of 8 students that we're doing weekly check-ins. And you could also take the course as a non-FYI if you're really interested in another FYI session. So we're at this really neat turning point in the semester right now where we're about halfway through, and the first half of the course is really kind of like a boot camp, and it's tough. And I tell the students it's tough. But we're starting to do the more interesting things, right? Now that we have learned some of the fundamentals and some of the basics, we're currently actually about to, the current project for this week is to create a Connect 4 game. And then in the following week, we're going to be creating the computer player, the AI player for the Connect 4 game. And we'll connect all these things together. And I really love this part because many of the students who felt it was really difficult finally start kind of coming around and saying, actually, wait, this is neat. I can do these really neat things. And by the end of the semester, a lot of them are really interested in computer science, and I tell them about my work that I'll tell you about, and want to continue on. So what I do with the FYI students there is we kind of meet separately and do these weekly check-ins, and we're doing what's called metacognition. So we're thinking about how their learning is progressing in the course. And in particular, some of the things that I build into the course, such as that they learn a new topic in a flipped classroom modality, which means that they're preparing for the class by watching some short video, like not an hour, like 5 minutes, that introduces a topic, and they take a pre-class preparation quiz, and then when they come to class, they're ready to discuss it. And then we do the projects, and then later on there's a quiz. And so this actually builds in this idea of what's called spaced repetition. And they've then seen the topic multiple times spaced apart in different ways. And we talk about this in the FYI seminar. How can you incorporate effective learning practices in all of your courses? And I really like doing that because the students actually start seeing why I design parts of the course a certain way, and they say it makes sense to them. I mean, maybe hopefully they're not just humoring me. So I've also taught problems of practice, and I often have students do capstones as a senior honors thesis. So let's see, just briefly, I was going to start a timer. I totally forgot to do that. So for example, my problems of practice course, a software engineering course, we actually model a little bit of something that I do in the first, or a bigger picture version of what I do in that first course. So at the end of my Intro CS course, they have a very short project. They have about a week and a half project where I actually encourage them to work in groups, and I say, pick something that you're interested in. And this goes back to what Nancy was talking about. If you are maybe really interested in economics or biology or English, we can find projects that relate to your main interest, and that really drives you to do something that is interesting for the end of the semester project. So in the software engineering course, we have a much larger version of that, and I actually try to connect it back to the first year course. And I ask the students, when you do a week and a half project, what are the challenging parts? And it often turns out it wasn't anything technical about computer science. It was planning their time, making a good plan for the feasibility of what they have to do in their projects, and things like that. And so I build in for their semester-long projects, that they should have different goals. And I tell them, I don't know if you've ever looked at a Kickstarter, they'll often have like reach goals. So I borrowed it from Kickstarter. I say you should have a safe goal, which is something that you are reasonably sure you're going to get to. You should have an expected goal that where if things go as you think they will, here's where you'll think you'll get the project to at the end of the semester. And then you should have reach goal, at least one reach goal. That would be if things are easier than they seem like they should be, what could you do? What could you add on as the next steps? And maybe you'll be able to fit them in if you end up getting some of the things done earlier. And so the challenge there turns out to be planning out a large project where the students, where you will be the students, have agency over the project. You decide the topic, you're deciding the scope, but I'm giving you the feedback on the scope, right? And I might come and say, this seems really ambitious. We need to come up with some better safe goals and set some, for you to set some timelines on when you'll reach some of these goals so that you can, at the end of the semester, have something really nice to show off. So I don't know how much time I used here, but I already mentioned earlier, I have a research group. And so some of the students will continue a project that they start in the problems of practice. And some of them will choose to work on a project that's relevant to my research. And so I've had students that start a project as a problems of practice thing, as a semester-long project, work on it over summer before their senior year, and then do a honors thesis in my department. And an honors thesis can basically be an independently driven project, but it's an opportunity to work a little bit closer with me on something that's even larger scale. And the idea is by the end of all of these experiences, you not only have the background of doing making small little parts, but you have ideas of how you incorporate them into larger things that live longer than a semester, right? And that you're not just working on homework assignments that you finish and turn in and they go away. They might go and affect someone's life, right? They might help someone with disabilities, and they might keep using the thing that you make at the end. And we might publish a paper on it, and you might present it, and other scientists might get ideas from what you did. And everything is larger than just what you learn in a single course. And I think that's what's really, really neat by the end of this, where I have students like presenting their honors thesis at the end and seeing the path they took all the way from the beginning. I rate the path that's on the screen right now. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer questions as they come up.
Great, thank you, John. I think this first, the remarks from Nancy about how students go through this process and what the process looks like from Professor Mcgee's perspective as well, really beautifully illustrates the kind of academic work that our students are excited to produce as Clark students, and that they are interested in doing new work in their field and producing interesting academic results as a result of that. And now we get to hear about what that looks like from the student perspective. So Arai, would you like to tell us a bit about your Steinbrecker Fellowship as well as any other of the practice-based experiences you've had at Clark?
Yeah, certainly. So I could actually start a little bit with my first year intensive, because that is where everything began for me in terms of my self-designed major and my specific interests in psychology. So I took a course called Queer Horror, which is somewhat screen studies, somewhat English, with Professor Jen Plant, who's also director of our writing center at Clark. And that course was really personally and academically life-changing for me, because queer studies isn't really something that's covered in American public school. And so that was a lot of history and culture that I felt that I now had access to. And that was a really, really exciting thing for me. So in addition to psychology, I already knew that I wanted to major in that. I started exploring other majors and thinking about my other interests. And I kept trying to take gender and sexuality related studies, which I loved, but then I took a social psychology course and developed an interest in genocide and intergroup violence and peace studies, and studied abroad in Rwanda, focusing on that as well. So thinking about all of those things, I decided to design my own major in studies of oppression and liberation, which my first year intensive professor gave me definitely a start in a couple steps in the right direction, because that's a very long process, but very worth it. And I ended up taking some problems of practice courses in the comparative literature department, working with the Worcester Historical Museum on their LGBTQ history archive, since Clark played a really profound role in the queer liberation movement in the 70s and 80s in particular. So all those things in mind, through the psychology department, I decided to pursue an honors thesis, which looks different for every department, but for psychology, it's a research project, a really long paper, and you can either collect your own data or draw on data from maybe a professor that you research with. So I decided that I wanted to research meaning making and understandings of family and adopted LGBTQ plus emerging adults, which is a ton of psych terms squished together. So I'll explain those a bit. So meaning making is basically a psychological process that explains how we cope with experiences that are either traumatic or otherwise difficult. So for example, experiences of discrimination, which is something I'm really interested in and obviously something that affects my own life. And so the meaning making model explains how we put that suffering into use and then cope with that reality in order to continue living lives that are like spiritually significant or morally significant. Basically, it's how we make sense of the problems that we go through. And then the understandings of family was the part that I was really curious about. And I wanted to pursue that specific topic because in terms of people who are adopted and people who are queer, one of the overlaps is how both of these groups have had to deconstruct and then redefine what family means because of those specific experiences of marginalization and exclusion. So I was really curious about how people from both of these groups make meaning of their experiences with oppression, cope with those realities, and then how they conceptualize families respectively. So that is what I'm working on right now. Since I'm a senior and it is now October, I'm working on my literature review, which I fortunately have a significant portion done already because I had already submitted a Steinbrecker grant application with a lot of that literature. So over the summer, I was able to have funding to help pay for living expenses and then also to pay my participants, which is something that was really important to me because the interview process involves quite a bit of rehashing of personal experiences. And so my interviews are qualitative, meaning I ask people questions in an interview style and they respond to them. My initial plan had been to conduct these interviews in person as much as possible within the region of New England. But fortunately, I was still able to conduct those interviews over Zoom or over phone. And I'm still working on recruiting some more participants right now. Over the summer, it was also really great. A component that I think they added this year was developing more of like a professional outlook on the Steinbrecker application. And so every month we had a meeting with all of the other people, the other Steinbrecker fellows, and we discussed things like how to make an elevator pitch of your experience, or basically how to explain it to a prospective employer or someone else who expresses interest in your research. So those were all really helpful experiences for me in terms of professional development, and also in terms of networking with my peers and getting to know all of their passions and how their research projects were able to come to life over the summer despite the difficulties related to the pandemic.
Wonderful. Thank you, Arai. So now we have made it to the question and answer portion of our program here. You have met our wonderful panelists and they are now at your disposal for questions. I'm going to get them started with a first question that focuses in on the mentorship piece that you have heard them all speak about while you are thinking of your questions and putting those in the Q&A feature. So feel free to start typing those in as we're answering this first question, and then we will begin to take yours. There are quite a few of you here tonight, so if we are not able to get to every question, Please make sure that you connect with us after this session. We really want to make sure that all of you have your questions answered through this whole Clarktoberfest series. So please make sure that we don't leave any stone unturned, but we will try to get to as many as we are able to tonight. So to begin, I have part of this question is posed to Nancy and John as professors, and part of this is posed to Arai as a student. But I'm wondering if you all would be willing to speak about a particularly memorable either mentor relationship that you have had or mentee relationship that you have had between faculty and students at Clark. So Nancy, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Of course, when you got as many gray hairs as I do, there's so many memorable ones. It's always hard to pick something that stands out, but there's a current one, and I think maybe I'll run with that. So I did a freshman intensive seminar last fall, and obviously in the spring, we transitioned to online teaching. And I should say, I don't remember if John mentioned this, but one of the cool things about first year intensives is the person who's your teacher in the seminar also serves as your faculty advisor until you declare your major. So I was keeping in touch with my students, and various students had various kinds of challenges and figuring out how to get home and across the globe and how to keep their learning going when they didn't feel as motivated due to illness, etc. And one student kind of stumped me. This was a student who checked in with me. I had set up an online system for office hours during the pandemic where students had a mechanism to sign up and connect with me, and we were Zooming. And her issue was that she wasn't feeling quite challenged as much as she was before. And she wanted to do a new activity that would give back to COVID. And she had a really interesting idea coming out of the first year intensive on education and developmental psychology. She wanted to help families with the knowledge that she had learned with their COVID homeschooling. And she couldn't figure out how. She had called many different volunteer places, and they all said, oh my God, we're so busy, we can't help. And so I worked with her to connect her both with the resources I knew in the city of Worcester, the Worcester Public Schools, the public school in her town, and our education program. So that's that idea of joint networking. I didn't have a clue how to solve it, but I knew who to connect her with. And she was able to come up with an activity that has been continuing on, that has added value to the lives of families. And that's very memorable. And it's also very Clarky, a kind of student who, you know, despite all the odds, you know, kind of keeps on and wants to give back to the community. And that was just a very beautiful story out of COVID that I thought of when you asked me that question.
Thank you, Nancy. And John, do you have an anecdote to share?
Sure. I have a couple, but I guess I'll just pick one. So I think I like telling this story. So this is a story about a student I had. Actually, I think she started the same year I started at Clark. And so I kind of consider, you know, when I finally got to see her graduate, it was kind of this nice moment of a student I had followed through their entire undergraduate career. So I had this student in a first year course and a second year course, and after their second year, they went to an internship, and turns out actually had a really poor experience at the internship, and it had to do with kind of how the structure of the internship and how she managed some issues or sort of didn't manage some issues that had come up. And so this created this sort of really negative experience for her. And when she came back her junior year, she actually had a really tough junior year and ended up like not passing one of her math courses. And she had been a TA for me in the department. And so we couldn't let her be a TA the next semester because she hadn't passed the math course. And so I sat down with her and I talked with her, right? You know, I said like, hey, I've noticed you're really struggling, you know, and we came up with a plan to implement some strategies that would make things work better for her, right? And so then the second semester, her junior year, things were much better. And she felt like she could connect with me and some other people at Clark to help her through some of the things that were giving her trouble. And so she went to another internship after her junior year. Actually, this is a research experience at another university, and had a good experience. And we kept in touch. And when she came back, she had been working on this cybersecurity thing at this other university. She came back and I said, well, this sounds interesting. What about people with disabilities, which is my area? How could they use something like what you've developed? And so then she did an honors thesis incorporating some cybersecurity way of that people with disabilities could authenticate themselves in a private manner on the computer. Because if you imagine you're using the mouse to like type on an on-screen keyboard, someone could just be watching it. So she came up with this new way of doing it, and we did a paper together. And then after she graduated, the summer after, she traveled to a conference and presented that work. And I thought the whole thing was this really sort of neat experience, because it doesn't fit in this idealized model of everything's happy and perfect all the time, but it was a more realistic situation, right? That you can struggle and figure out how you handle difficulties and overcome them, and then to see her like presenting at an international conference to top tier scientists, it was great, right? It was a really great experience.
Wonderful. And Arai, can you speak about a experience that you have had?
Sure. So I can actually think of several, but I'll focus on one of them. I took a cultural psychology course. I think it was my sophomore year, and that was really interesting to me, and a really impactful course because a lot of it involved deconstructing psychology itself as a Western social scientific field, and that was with Professor Esteban Cardamil, who's in the psychology department, but also does some comparative race and ethnic studies. So I really enjoyed that course, and it fulfilled the cultural or developmental cluster of the psychology major. In case any of you are interested, I highly recommend it. And I was actually at this time, I spent a lot of my sophomore year working on designing the curriculum and the intellectual rationale for my self-design major. So ordinarily for a major, I think either Professor Budwig or Professor Mcgee mentioned that you don't have to declare your major until the end of your sophomore year. Normally, that's a really simple process for any of our 30+ pre-existing majors. You just fill out a piece of paper, you have your advisor sign it, that's pretty much it. You turn it into academic advising. It's great. Doing that for psychology was seamless. If you want to design your own major, it's a bit more complicated, and that involves forming a committee of 3 full-time faculty members as opposed to 1, designing your own curriculum, basically making up rules for yourself and then following them, and then an intellectual rationale, which is basically you writing an in-depth explanation of why you really want to study the specific thing rather than all the other majors out there that Clark has to offer, which isn't easy. That's a pretty significant task. So sophomore year, I was working on that, and I was trying really hard to find someone who could advise me in comparative race and ethnic studies, which was difficult because I hadn't yet taken very many courses in that area. So I was working with Professor Huang, who is now actually a dean, and she was advising me. We had met a couple of times, but she got promoted to dean and could no longer take me on as an advisee, which was great news for her, but not so good news for me. And so I was kind of left to scramble to find a new faculty advisor. She gave some recommendations, but I wanted someone who also had some experience in other departments that I was working in. So this was while I was taking my cultural psychology course, and after class one day, I went to Professor Cardamil and I was like, hey, Liz, I know that this is kind of late in the process, but would you be willing to be a part of my faculty advising committee for my self-design major? And he was like, yes, absolutely. We can meet about it. It sounds like you are in kind of a difficult situation and we can definitely get that worked out. So we met. He gave me some really thorough feedback on my curriculum and my rationale, and we continued from there. Finally, I was able to submit it, and it was approved after a arduous process of paperwork, but it was absolutely worth it. And that is currently what I've been studying. In addition to that, though, despite having only taken one class with him last year, my junior year, I was thinking more about what I wanted to do for grad school because I knew that that was something I wanted to pursue. But unlike a lot of majors, for psychology, there isn't one thing that you go to grad school for. There is so many different options and so many different degree types, and it's kind of confusing as an undergrad getting a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology to think about, well, what's the difference between a PhD versus a PsyD, and what's the difference between clinical and counseling psychology, and like, should I take this class or this class? Or like get a master's in social work. So those were all the questions I had floating in my head last year. So I hadn't been in touch with Professor Cardamel in a while, but I sent him an email and I asked if he'd be willing to meet and give me some career advice since he works in abnormal psychology and is trained in clinical psychology, and that's my interest in grad school. So he met with me and we talked for over an hour. And it turns out he actually grew up really close to where I grew up as well. So we talked about that. He's from Maryland, I'm from Northern Virginia. And he gave me some really helpful advice and kind of broke down the different options for grad school for what I'm interested in the clinical field. So that was really helpful for me. And I still keep in touch with him. This was a while ago when it came out, but I saw the film Midsommar. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it's an A24, really gory, intense psychological thriller. But there are themes of kind of moral relativism and ethnographic research and like research ethics that are involved in that. And the whole time I was watching the movie, I was thinking of the cultural psych class that I'd taken with him. So right after I got out of the theater, I got on my Outlook app and I emailed him and I was like, have you seen this movie? And he emailed back and he was like, I actually can't stand horror movies, but thank you anyway for the recommendation. So I really appreciate that mentorship experience I've had with him. But again, it's only one of several that I've had over my time at Clark.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for that. We have some great questions coming in. So I'm going to turn it over to audience questions now. And the first one actually is going to be for Arai. We have several about their programs of study. So we're going to, I'm going to try to capture a couple of different questions in one here, Arai, for you, but we have some folks who are interested in the gender studies discipline that you have some experience in, as well as what FYI or POP courses in the realm of peace studies might look like. So if you can talk a little bit about the coursework that you've had a chance to take more broadly so that we can capture some of these questions and just give us some examples of the types of classes that you've taken in that multidisciplinary self-design program that you've put together for yourself.
Yeah, sure. So the Women's Gender Studies program at Clark is really excellent. And if I hadn't designed my own major, that is absolutely what I would have majored in addition to psychology. It's a fairly interdisciplinary department, which I really appreciate in that there are only a few classes at Clark in the course title that are explicitly women's and gender studies. The other courses in that department are actually through other departments. So you can, if you're interested more in political science, for example, you can take political science classes that focus on issues of gender and sexuality. If you're more interested in psychology like I am, there are ways that you can fulfill the requirements in that way. And I think that that's one of the really advantageous things about the major is that you're able to learn about similar topics from completely different perspectives. And I'm sure as these professors know, each department often has, or each discipline kind of has a different idea of these topics or like a different framework through which they evaluate them. So that helped me gain a lot of intellectual breadth, was the interdisciplinary nature of that. I believe peace studies is actually similar in that there are only, I think, 2 or 3 classes at Clark that are specific peace studies courses, but the other ones are through other departments. So for example, a course I took called Topics in Feminist Theory, yes, that would fulfill a women's and gender studies requirement. It also actually counted as a peace studies requirement because so much of what we spoke about in that class was related to liberation and activism. I can't speak to specific problems of practice courses within the peace studies department, But if you look up Clark University Peace Studies or Clark University Women's and Gender Studies, the first or second link should take you right to that department's page. And that's where you can access more information about those specific requirements. And you can also access information about all the different courses Clark has to offer and course descriptions of those as well.
Thank you, Arai. I will echo what Arai just mentioned, that we have some questions here about specific courses for specific majors. And so we won't cover that tonight because we have folks from only a small variety of programs here. And I'm not going to ask them to speak about disciplines that they don't work in. But I will ask that our audience members go right ahead and look at these classes on our website. The whole course catalog is available under our registrar's website, and you can search for POP classes. You can search for FYI classes. You can search for these with those 3-letter codes, so POP, FYI, etc., and see in a particular department what is being offered. And they change from semester to semester, so you can get a kind of snapshot of what is being offered currently and what might be offered for the future. So I do encourage you to do that. But the next question that I'm going to tee up here is for our faculty members that are on the call, so Nancy and John. We have someone that's curious about how you conduct your office hours. So Nancy, could you give an example of how you conduct office hours? And then John, can you underscore if yours differ at all? And you can speak a little bit about pre-COVID versus COVID office hours. I'm sure they are different.
Yeah. So pre-COVID, I always set a time that I am available on the syllabus. And no matter what time I pick, I can be guaranteed most all the students are not free and do not want to meet at that time. I still find it helpful to have one for the occasional student who really wants to see in writing when I will be in my office. And I make that, as do most faculty, for at least an hour a week. In addition, though, I have what's called TBA. And I have encouraged students, starting with the first year intensive, to reach out to me. And quite frankly, all my advisees and students know if they don't reach out to me, I'll prompt them. I encourage students to visit my office hour, even if they don't have a specific question, which brings me to the second point about office hours I'll make, is some students may be wondering, what's an office hour? In fact, some students in my first year seminar have thought that's a time I'm working in my office and not available to students. So actually, office hour is a time where you can come by and talk to your advisor. And usually in my office hour, there'll be mandarin oranges and cookies on the table to kind of prompt students to want to drop by and come in and sit and have a cup of tea or something and just chat. But post-COVID, that's been something that I have not been doing. And so what I do is I use an online system that's available through the university where I've blocked pretty much daily hours where students can sign up to meet with me informally or formally, and they know that I'll be around. And so they just get online, and I'd say faculty in general are very accessible. We all have our quirks. Some of us have more time in the morning, sometimes like to hold office hours in the evening, sometimes it's on an appointment basis, but all faculty have times during the week where we enjoy to get together with students, whether it be with regard to specific questions about a course or trying to figure out their pathway or something like that. So that's how I handle office hours. I think in my department, it's pretty traditional that people will set a time, but also often need to use other time blocks because students are busy.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Mine work pretty similarly. I'll usually set 2 or maybe even 3 hours where students can just drop in. But then I say, if my office door is open, then feel free to drop in. So even if I'm there other times and they're walking down the hall, and oftentimes no one will come during the set hours, right? But then people will drop in at the random times when the office door is open, right? And I leave it open so that it's accessible. During the advising period where everyone needs a little meeting, I'll do a booking system. So you can go on you can book me or whatever system I'm using and set up a 15-minute slot. And in the era of COVID, it's just on Zoom, right? So you can have drop-in hours on Zoom where I'm there sitting there, I'm doing some work, and then like someone drops in and it goes bing bing, and I know someone has shown up.
Perfect, thank you. Now, I know Arai is a double major, but we have a question about double majors, and is this common? Are they doable? This student is interested in computer science and French specifically, and I wonder, John, if you would speak about your impression of that combination and what you have seen students pair computer science with out of curiosity, and how common you find that to be.
Sure, absolutely. Actually, a lot of students double major. I think there's a rare triple major that you see sometimes, but you need to like fit in a summer course in order to triple major. So yeah, you can do any double major you want, and there'll be the common ones, there'll be less common ones. Common ones in CS include like CS in math or CS in physics or something like that. We actually have people that do like CS in music is actually somewhat common. Some people do like CS major and studio art minors, and because they're interested in design of software and design of other things, and graphics design, so they'll do like kind of those kinds of connections. So yeah, computer science and French, it would totally go together. It'd be totally, it'd be awesome.
Thank you.
If I could just add one little bit too, is a lot of students come in and they want to double major, which is great if that's what they want to do. There's clearly time and still time to get the general education requirements in. But sometimes as advisors, we'll also ask, maybe what they want to do is a minor and they didn't know that was possible, or a concentration. And concentrations at Clark are really cool. They're interdisciplinary minors. So they give you a chance to do what Arai was talking about, view a topic from different disciplines, but in a minor sort of way in 7 or 8 courses. So some of my advisees right now might major in psych, do an interdisciplinary concentration and a minor, or just one of those. Sometimes I think the double major can be a little overrated. So pre-law is an example. I know somebody on the call is interested in pre-law. There's a law and society concentration, which is really common for some of my majors who major in psych and go on.
Well, thank you for setting up that segue for me, Nancy. I was just going to comment that we have a question each about our pre-law and pre-med, pre-professional advising programs. And I'm going to just briefly say that these are 2 pre-professional advising programs that we offer, where you would have an academic advisor in your major area and any additional programs that you might be doing academically speaking for your majors and minors and concentrations. But then you would also have a pre-professional advisor in those areas for either pre-law or pre-med or pre-health professions. But what these students are asking is about kind of how does this manifest, and what does the LEEP curriculum offer to a student who has a pretty good idea of what pre-professional track they want? Why this over a more traditional route for one of these fields? And I think that can speak to lots of folks who have a good idea of what they want to do professionally. Why would we recommend this model? Nancy, could you potentially take this one on?
Sure. Well, I'll just say I'm an advocate, and I think nationally there's a lot of sense from employers that getting a liberal education is probably the best preparation, the kinds of skills that you get that you'll find in almost any major: critical thinking, communication, time management, etc. And the effective practice piece also gives you, in different disciplines, the opportunity to actually come up with a product. And what's really interesting about this, and is probably far away for many of you high schoolers, but by the time you're beginning to get ready to graduate and think of your next steps, you want to have some things that you can show to show what you did. It could be the kind of research that Arai is doing, but it could be certain kind of activities or projects that you've worked on. And one of the neat things about the LEEP curricular framework for pre-professional kind of training is that you have a portfolio, even if it isn't in the precise area, it might be, and it might link up, to really show and not just tell as you're going on and applying for your next step. And usually that is some kind of professional graduate school. And so I've heard this quite a lot as I travel around, that having those products, and it's a good chance to say that students are encouraged, it's nearly required, that their capstone projects be featured at one of our academic spree day or fall fest, which is a day where the campus celebrates the projects of students, and they get the chance either orally or in poster format, including online this year, to show the work they've been doing and have faculty and staff from different disciplines come and talk with them about their projects. And I think that's another valuable asset as you're thinking of going on in pre-professional or any kind of career, to have a product that you can show. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you, Nancy. And we actually are just about out of time, but I'm going to have Arai wrap us up because it's been a little while since I posed a question to Arai, and I would love to hear, Arai, kind of the ways that you feel that this model of education have prepared you for that next step that you are facing down in a semester or so here. What kinds of tools do you feel that you have for that, for meeting your future goals?
Sure. So some of the skills that Professor Budwig mentioned were skills that I expected to attain in college, whatever college I went to, not Clark specifically, but I think that being a student here has taught me a lot about critical thinking, specifically in a way that I don't necessarily think I would have gotten from the other institutions that I was admitted to. And something that I really appreciate about Clark in particular is how passionate people are, and how we really foster an academic culture of collaboration, as opposed to competition. That's something that we talk about a lot, just because it's so drastically different from what I experienced before college. And so before college, I definitely had a mindset of, yes, there are specific skills I will acquire in college. I'm sure I'll become a more critical thinker. I'm sure that my writing will get even better. I'm sure that I'll become more articulate and better at public speaking. But I didn't think specifically about how I would learn to appreciate and learn from my peers so much, because that wasn't something that was really emphasized in my high school education. So I think I've gained a lot of humility being a student at Clark, because I feel like I've had some of my beliefs, I've unlearned a lot of beliefs that I had previously about education, and I've been able to realize how much I value learning, how self-motivated I am, and how much I have to learn from my peers here. I think that, of course, through the classes I've taken, I've learned a lot, and from professors directly I have, as well as from all of the assignments and all the papers that I've written. But more so than anything, I think that through class discussions and person-to-person interactions with other students, I've been able to learn the most about how to be a critical thinker, and then also how to learn and to lead compassionately.
That was a wonderful culmination to our session here today. Thank you so much, Arai. And thank you to Nancy and John for your incredible contributions as well. I really appreciate all of you for being here with us. And thank you all to our audience for joining us this evening for our LEEP the Clark curriculum session in our Clarktoberfest series. We are so grateful that you are engaging with us in this way through our programs. We have many more exciting Clarktoberfest sessions to come. If you are a senior and you are interested in interviewing, we want to encourage you to participate in an online interview. Arai is one of our interviewers, so you might get to talk to them. But we also, for juniors, have, and anyone really who's interested, have some opportunities for a virtual coffee with a Clarkie, just an informal chat. So check out the bonus tab on your Clarktoberfest website to see the other options for what you can engage in. And we hope to see you again on more sessions to come. So thank you everyone tonight, and have a great rest of your evening.